Jarrett is not your typical defense attorney. In fact, you could say he knows the law from the inside out.
Although I received my diploma from Loyola Law School in Chicago, I started law school in Green Bay Correctional Facility.
Jarrett was wrongfully convicted himself. He was 17 when he was arrested, accused of sexually assaulting a student at the University of Wisconsin, a crime he denied from the start.
Welcome everybody to another episode of Convoluted. Today I am going to tell you about two Chicago teenagers who were wrongfully convicted for a sexual assault in Wisconsin. Alright, so right off the bat, Jarrett Adams, who is the main subject of this episode, he has quite the media presence. So by that I mean there's a plethora of interviews and articles and videos with him, audio, etc., podcasts. So naturally I used a good portion of those sources, but I didn't use every single one to write this episode. And of course I will link my sources down below in the information, but I wanted to mention that just, by Googling Jarrett Adams, you'll find multiple things about him. There's actually an episode of the Wrongful Convictions podcast with an interview with Jarrett Adams, Dmitri Henley, and Keith Finley. And Keith Finley is the co-founder of the Wisconsin Innocence Project. He works for the University of Wisconsin School of Law. He was the president of the Innocence Network for 5 years. He helped start a nonprofit called the Center for Integrity in Forensic Sciences and more. This dude's done a lot. Keith Finley played an important role in Jarrett Adams' case. This is where we start off in September of 1998. According to the National Registry of Exonerations, this occurred on September 6th of 1998, but according to Adams' appeal decision document, it was September 5th, but a lot of the other sources said September 6th as well. I don't know if it was like the event started September 5th and moved into the night of September 6th, but either way, it was one of those days, and I'm leaning towards the 6th, but I don't know. So according to my sources, Jarrett Adams, Dmitri Henley, and Rovon Hill, they were three black teenagers from Chicago, and they drove into Wisconsin to the University of Wisconsin Whitewater campus to look for a party. And Whitewater, Wisconsin is a pretty small town in the southern portion of Wisconsin. Fun fact, I actually used to live about 45 minutes to an hour away from Whitewater for a little while. Those three teenagers ended up at the Whitewater campus and ended up in the dorm room of Sean DeMaine, where they were playing video games with him, when two white female students, I'm going to call the accuser and her roommate, they came back from a social event or party. And according to the National Registry of Exonerations and a few other sources, the accuser actually had a couple drinks at the previous social event or party. Those two girls, they stopped by Sean DeMaine's room and hung out there for a little bit, and then they ended up inviting the three teenagers from Chicago up to their room, their dorm room. Those were Jarrett Adams, Dmitri Henley, and Rovon Hill. The accuser's roommate, she stopped at another room along the way to talk with a friend, while the accuser and the three guys went to their room. And they get into a lot of this section in the Wrongful Convictions podcast episode. You should definitely check that out. And according to Jarrett, in that interview on the Wrongful Convictions podcast, the three teenagers didn't all go up at once. They kind of trickled up one by one after each other. And when the accuser's roommate came back, finally arrived at her room, she opened the door to see the three men partially undressed and believed the accuser had been performing oral sex on one of the guys on the roommate's bed. The accuser's roommate ran off and called the accuser a slut, and the accuser got up and actually followed after her. And according to the appeal decision document that I read, her roommate locked the door in another dorm room, and the accuser tried to talk to her through the door, apparently asking her if she was mad. After a few minutes, the accuser claims that she left and went downstairs, but not to her room. And when those two girls were talking through the door there, Apparently, the accuser never indicated anything about being a victim or being sexually assaulted or anything like that, just asking her if she was mad. In that Wrongful Convictions podcast interview with Jason Flom, Dmitri Henley, he said that he actually accompanied the accuser to the room where the roommate locked herself in and tried to talk to the roommate and get her to come out of the room. And according to all that, she left the room voluntarily. So, she was able to leave the room on her own accord, so there was no account or sign of them restraining her in the room. She was able to leave on her own accord, voluntarily. And they also talk, more about this in that interview. She had multiple opportunities to get help if she was being sexually assaulted, because she was able to leave the room voluntarily. She had the opportunity apparently to go to another stairwell that wasn't by her door, so she could have gone the opposite way. She would have had to walk by the RA's room to get back to her room and could have stopped there. But the accuser voluntarily returned back to the room. After the encounter, the accuser called her boyfriend or friend and went to his room where she claimed that she had been raped by 3 black men. And apparently she didn't want to go to the hospital, she didn't want to go to the police, so nothing was really done for a little while. But about 3 months later, those 3 teenagers, Jarrett Adams, Dmitri Henley, and Rovon Hill, they were all arrested. And this next portion comes from the Birmingham Times. Jarrett said that he came home one day and there was a card in his door telling Jarrett to come down to the police station. And on the card, it just said robbery/homicide. And they talk more about this portion as well in the Wrongful Convictions episode, that podcast. Initially, all 3 of the guys were tried together, but then there was actually a mistrial due to an improper attempt by the state to amend its charges at the close of evidence. Now, Keith Finley explained a lot of this in the Wrongful Convictions podcast episode. The prosecution recognized that there was a flaw in the case altogether, and so the prosecution then moved to amend the charges to fit the evidence that matched the accuser's account. Rovon Hill's defense attorney, he objected, and the court agreed it was unfair to amend charges mid-trial. And so Hill's lawyer claimed the mistrial was actually caused by the prosecution's mistakes and therefore should be barred. This is still coming from Keith Finley's explanation. As the prosecutors prepared to retry the 3 teenagers, Rovon Hill's lawyer pursued leave to appeal and stop the retrial from occurring at all. The prosecution in turn didn't want to wait for that appeal to be concluded and just pulled Dmitri and Jarrett's case away from Rovon Hill's case. So then Jarrett Adams and Dmitri Henley, they were tried together, and the prosecution mostly relied on the accuser's testimony. In her testimony, she claimed that she did not invite the 3 men up there, and that they suddenly just appeared behind her and entered the room and just kind of barged in. She continued on saying that the men actually assaulted her against her will and claimed to have not resisted due to fear. But the defense didn't call any witnesses, and they relied on a no defense strategy, I guess, as their defense, essentially because they relied on the fact that the state failed to carry its burden of proof. So they were just like, they failed their job, so that's our defense, basically. Unfortunately, in February of 2000, Jarrett Adams and Dmitri Henley were convicted by an all-white jury in Jefferson County. Henley was sentenced to 20 years in prison, while Adams was actually sentenced to 28 years in prison. And Jarrett Adams said in the Wrongful Convictions podcast interview that because he had an outburst in court, he was given an additional 8 years. Therefore, he went to a different prison than Dmitri did, actually. Rovon Hill, because of his lawyer actually being pretty good, Rovon Hill was tried separately, and the prosecution dismissed the charges after a hung jury in February of 2001. A major difference was the fact that Rovon Hill's lawyer, he actually called Sean DeMaine as a witness, the dude that they were playing video games with in the dorm room, and his testimony contradicted the accuser's story. And don't forget, the roommate's story didn't exactly match either. Sean DeMaine testified that after the sexual encounter between the guys and the accuser, that they were all downstairs in the smoking area area socializing and having a good time, smoking cigarettes or whatever. Both Dmitri Henley and Jarrett Adams naturally appealed the conviction, but they were both dismissed and failed. After some time, Dmitri Henley would get in contact with the Wisconsin Innocence Project asking for help to file a federal petition for a writ of habeas corpus. And I've previously explained what a writ of habeas corpus is, but I will put the definition up right here and you guys can read it for a bit. Unfortunately, after Dmitri tried to file that habeas corpus petition, it was past the legal time period, which was about a year I think exactly. And according to the National Registry of Exonerations, Adams was actually sentenced 1 week later. Therefore, he still had 1 more week to file the same petition before the legal time period was up. So the Wisconsin Innocence Project filed a petition on Jarrett Adams' behalf, and they alleged that there was insufficient evidence and that Adams' trial lawyer had been ineffective. And they also attest that Sean Demain should have been called as a witness. And the U.S. District Court for Eastern District of Wisconsin denied the petition. On June 20th, 2006, the U.S. Court of Appeals in the 7th Circuit overturned the District Court and overturned Adams' conviction. The court established that there was no possible strategic reason not to call Sean Demain to establish that the event was consensual. And Jarrett Adams was released from prison in January of 2007. And the prosecution dismissed the charges on February 9th, 2007. Dmitri Henley then filed a petition for a new trial on the same grounds. And I'm just going to quote something verbatim from the National Registry of Exonerations. Although Henley had previously sought a new trial and was rejected by the state and federal courts, and therefore his legal remedies were exhausted, his lawyers argued that he should be granted a new trial in the interest of justice. And so the circuit court granted a new trial for Dmitri Henley. The judge then agreed and reversed Dmitri's conviction. But even though that sounds like it should be over, it's not, because why would our legal system be so kind and nice? In July of 2010, the Supreme Court of Wisconsin reversed the decision, which is fucking stupid. And I'm gonna paraphrase something that Keith Finley said in the Wrongful Convictions podcast interview. Everything for the 3 teenagers was the same crime, same exact circumstances, but it was 3 different outcomes. The Supreme Court chose to challenge whether the judge had legal authority to grant a new trial in the interest of justice. And here's another quote from the National Registry of Exonerations. Wisconsin circuit courts do not have the inherent authority to order a new trial in the interest of justice when a case is not before the court under a proper procedural mechanism. The Supreme Court changed the law and ruled that the circuit courts do not have the authority and reinstated Dmitri's conviction for fucking no, I don't even know why. That's just so dumb. The Wisconsin Innocence Project, they went back to the circuit court judge and who was in agreement that Dmitri's conviction should be overturned, and since they couldn't do that now, they asked the judge for a sentence modification, and the judge changed it to time served so that Dmitri could at least get out of prison, but he still remains convicted on paper, even though Jarrett Adams had been exonerated and Rovan Hill was never charged. Jarrett Adams tried to get compensation but was denied in December 2009. And once again, I'm going to quote something from the National Registry of Exonerations. The evidence is not clear and convicting that the claimant was innocent of the crime for which he suffered imprisonment. Jarrett Adams continued on and persevered, stayed strong, and ended up getting his law degree at Loyola University College School of Law in 2015. And then he started a public interest law fellowship with Anne Claire Williams. She was the judge for the 7th Circuit U.S. Court of Appeals, the same court that reversed Adams' conviction. Adams also joined the Innocence Project Litigation Department as the department's very first post-conviction litigation fellow in July 2016. And prior to that, Adams also co-founded a nonprofit called Life After Justice, which I'll also link below. According to Jarrett's website, he launched the law offices of Jarrett Adams in 2017, and he has been admitted to practice in multiple locations, which I'll put a screenshot right here for you to look at. NBC news clip on YouTube that I watched, they discussed a bit more about Jarrett taking on another case in Wisconsin. A man named Richard Beranek, or Beranek, I think it's Beranek, Beranek, who spent about 18 years in prison before Jarrett Adams helped overturn his conviction. And that was, according to that same NBC News video clip, Jarrett's first win as a lawyer. And I do plan on making an episode about Richard Beranek as well as a follow-up. In another video from the State Bar of Wisconsin on YouTube, they interviewed Jarrett Adams, where Jarrett talked about being able to understand both sides of the table now, both sides of the courtroom in his practice, and making sure that he's extra thorough with his clients and explaining everything, because he's literally been on both sides now.
So I'm able to see the courtroom from both sides of the table, if that makes sense. I understand what it's like to be a client having no knowledge about what's going on and wanting to understand, but too afraid to look dumb by asking a question.
And I would also like to mention another interview that I watched by Impact Theory with, I don't know how to say his name, Tom Bilyeu, Bilyeu, where Jarrett discusses a lot more about his life and his cellmate who actually helped him to kind of push on into the legal process. And here's a direct quote from Jarrett Adams' website. During law school, Mr. Adams worked as an investigator for the Illinois Federal Defenders Program. For his work with the clemency petition of Reynolds Wintersmith, ultimately granted by President Obama, he received the National Defender Investigators Association Investigator of the Year Award. And on January of 2020, Adams was sworn in as a lawyer in the state of Wisconsin. And Jarrett also has a book out there that you can buy called Redeeming Justice: From Defendant to Defender, My Fight for Equity on Both Sides of a Broken System. I have not read it yet, but it's on the list of books to be read. Thank you guys for making it to the end of the video. I really appreciate any support. Make sure to subscribe, like, leave a comment. I'll try to respond if you do leave a comment, and stay tuned for more Convoluted episodes. More importantly, make sure to check out the Wisconsin Innocence Project and donate or volunteer if you are able to. And check out Jarrett Adams' law website and his nonprofit. I'll link his website, and I'll link the nonprofit as well, Life After Justice. And lastly, make sure to check out the National Registry of Exonerations, where I usually start a lot of these stories from and then branch out from there. Thank you guys, and have a good day or night wherever you are.